a woman appeared to me who is an orthopedic surgeon. She's a reserved and quiet lady. She broke her leg and couldn't walk anymore. Furthermore, she was in a condition that even a colleague of mine, who always looked down on me, couldn't treat. I wondered if I could treat such a patient. I had my doubts, but she was the one who should be feeling anxious. I faced her conditions, and together, we tried to work things out with some treatment. Little did I know at that time, this encounter would change my life in a whole different way. My name is Terry Johnson. I'm a 30-year-old orthopedic surgeon. I work at a large hospital, so many patients come in through referrals. I'm busy every day, but I have a little problem. That problem is the presence of my colleague, Matt Adams. There's another orthopedic surgeon at my workplace, and that's Matt. He's an arrogant man who values educational backgrounds and often belittles me, who didn't graduate from a top-tier medical school, calling me incompetent. He even calls me incompetent like it's my nickname. In the US, there's a shortage of doctors, and there are many connections and factions among us. Perhaps it's understandable to be elitist because of this, but Matt is just too blatant. Sure, Matt is brilliant, and from his perspective, I might be close to being incompetent. But if you start saying that, then about half of the doctors in the hospital would be deemed incompetent. Matt and I run the orthopedics department of the hospital. This time, a slightly complicated patient is coming. Apparently, the daughter of some prominent figure or professor that Matt is close to is visiting our place today. It seems no doctor was specifically requested, but Matt seemed eager to take the case, saying, "She fractured her right thigh in an accident and can't walk. Well, if she's treated by someone as skilled as me, she'll recover quickly. They'll owe me one." Telling me the symptoms was probably just a minimum information sharing and a way to hint that I shouldn't interfere. From my point of view, I feel he should prioritize the patient's well-being. Matt is competent, so he should be fine. With that thought, I focused on examining my other patients. However, it seems Matt's treatment wasn't going as planned. Given that the patient is young, she should heal quickly, and it seems the bone I've heard Matt muttering this numerous times, and it's gotten me quite worried. Matt is arrogant and has a high pride, which has gotten him into trouble with patients on multiple occasions. He tends to clash especially with patients who are wary or don't go along with his prescribed treatments. While I'd expect Matt not to behave this way with a prominent figure's daughter, there's a real risk he could lash out at other patients. So, seeing Matt frustrated and confused, I hesitantly suggested, if it's psychological trauma, maybe it'd be better to refer her to a counselor. It could be the shock from the accident. "Shut up. Don't tell me what to do, you incompetent. I'm leagues above you," he snapped back, showing no intention to listen. It's not something that started just now, but I really do think he's incredibly stubborn. That stubbornness is necessary at times, but it seems to have gotten in the way this time. Turns out, a patient under Matt's care was transferred to me. Apparently, the patient's parents, seeing their daughter unable to walk for so long, requested another orthopedic surgeon to take a look if there was one available immediately. This seemed to have deeply wounded Matt's pride, and he was pretty livid. But at the end of the day, providing medical care is a service profession. The patient always comes first. It was here where I first met her, Amy. She's 21 years old. She got injured in a collision with a motorcycle on her way to school, and even a month and a half after the accident, though her wounds have healed, she still can't walk. Recently, She's been going through physical therapy with painkillers, but those medications can be hard on the body, and it's not ideal to take them for a long time. She had an X-ray taken with me again, but I couldn't find any issues that would prevent her from walking. So, I decided to listen to what she had to say. I'm not a counselor, so I can't fully understand a patient's feelings. But the one who knows a patient best is the patient themselves. Your leg hurts, doesn't it? Does it hurt now? Only when I try to walk, she said hesitantly, her gaze wandering. She seems really shy, and when someone like her encounters a dominant doctor like Matt, they might just go along with the treatment without voicing their concerns. She probably always agrees, without expressing her own opinion. Given Matt's nature, I suspect that after the initial diagnosis, he relied on data rather than the patient's voice to decide what treatment she needed. It's not inherently a wrong approach. Sometimes patients have misconceptions, and the real issue lies elsewhere. I mentioned earlier that the patient knows best, but we doctors need to identify any misconceptions or contradictions. Matt relied on data for his diagnosis, and it didn't work out. So, I'll make sure to include the patient's voice in my decision-making process. From our earlier conversation, she indicated that her leg doesn't hurt unless she's putting weight on it, suggesting that the pain might be due to the stress or strain. I decided to accompany her to physical therapy. I wanted to observe how she attempts to stand or move, from a doctor's perspective. Of course, detailed guidance would be given by the PD specialist, and I wouldn't interfere with that. Timidly, with a little help, Amy began to stand up. But she sat down immediately, saying, "My foot hurts." I mumbled. From the X-ray of her thigh bone, she looked perfectly healthy. This means the cause could be somewhere other than the thigh, or it might be a muscular or neural issue. But even if that's the case, there's weight applied when sitting, so there could be pain when trying to stand up. Should I check all possible causes meticulously? Lost in these thoughts, my gaze fell on her foot. That's when I noticed something. Her big toe was bent inward. Amy, I gotta ask, were you born with a bunion? A bunion is when the big toe deforms and bends inward. There are two types, congenital and the one caused by wearing narrow shoes. Amy had the former, the congenital type. And here, I realized our big misunderstanding. She said her foot hurt, but we mistakenly thought she meant her thigh. For us medical professionals, we know there is a distinction between foot and leg. But to the average person, it can all be referred to as the foot. And truth be told, Amy initially did complain about her thigh hurting. After all, it was broken. But we believed the only fracture was in the thigh, so we didn't take an X-ray of the foot. The drawback with X-rays is that you can't capture the whole body at once. You have to be specific about where you're looking. So we were focused on her thigh, not taking a foot X-ray. But when I took an X-ray of her foot, there was a small but definite fracture. Small as it was, it hadn't been properly set, and she had even started rehabilitation, so the bone still wasn't healed. One thing I want to clarify is diagnosing fractures can be really tough. Small ones can easily be overlooked. At first, it might seem like a bruise, but if the pain persists, another X-ray might reveal a fracture. It happens more often than you'd think. In Amy's case, the injury to her thigh was so severe that the small crack in her foot went unnoticed. There's also a minor fracture in the foot, and I suspect the pain might also be from bunions, so once the fracture heals, we should correct the bunion too. Understood. She nods. After that, she started her foot treatment, and the fracture treatment was successfully completed. While surgery is an option for bunions, they can improve significantly with the right kind of support and a change of shoes. So, there was a process of fitting her with a support brace. But for some reason, It seemed that Amy struggled to voice her opinions, trusting mostly just me. Usually, the adjustment of such braces is done by the nurses, but since she seemed more comfortable expressing her needs to me, I took charge. I was checking if she felt any discomfort with the brace on. "How about here? Is it too tight?" It's a bit loose. It's essential to wear the brace correctly, or its effectiveness diminishes." I was guiding her on how to wear it properly, but since it was her first time using a brace, there were some challenges. "What about this part? Should I tighten it a bit?" "No, stop." Suddenly she raised her voice. Though she generally spoke softly, so it wasn't very loud. It seemed I had tightened it too much. "I'm sorry, did I make it too tight? Would you like to try adjusting it yourself?" "I'll do it." Apparently, when I tried, it became too tight for her. In the end, she started adjusting it herself. Thankfully, this helped her get used to handling the brace, and she could put it on by herself. Thanks to the brace, the pain from her bunion eased, and little by little, she began to push herself more in her rehabilitation. It took some time, but she managed to walk properly. She's a bit shy but seemed diligent and hardworking. Once the pain was gone, she actively participated in her rehab sessions. She seemed to have a low pain tolerance and was a bit scared. Well, pain is something we all fear, so it's understandable. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much. On the last day of rehab, she stood firmly on her own 2 feet and gave a bow to both me and Matt. Today we had a VIP. Well, her father was also there, expressing his gratitude to the both of us. But it was clear that I was getting more of the credit. He probably heard about me from Amy. "Thanks to you guys, my daughter can walk again." "Thank you." Indeed, I knew I could count on the exceptional Dr. Adams and the son of Dr. Johnson. I knew I made the right decision entrusting her to you, Amy's parents said as they departed. But Matt looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Wait, did he just say, son of Dr. Johnson? Yay, keep that under wraps for me, okay? If it gets out, it's going to be a hassle. The reason why Matt's eyes are wide open. It must be about my parents. Both of my parents are quite renowned surgeons. But I didn't want to just follow the path they laid out for me, so I chose the university by myself. If people knew about my parents, they'd have certain expectations, and I didn't want that, hence the secrecy. But it seems Amy's father somehow found out. If you find out that the person you called incompetent turns out to be the son of renowned doctors, well, it's no wonder you'd be shocked. Please, I beg you, don't tell your parents about me. Matt lowered his head as if he was about to deeply bow to me. In the tight-knit medical community, a bad reputation could be a fatal wound in your career. Seeing Matt so distressed, I assured him, if you've learned anything from this, stop trying to pull rank with your education. You're a skilled doc after all. I told him just like that. In reality, the success of treating Amy had a lot to do with Matt. Matt might have missed the fractured bone on her foot, but he diligently checked everything else. Thanks to that, I was able to accurately pinpoint the fracture. Without Matt, I surely would have taken much longer to identify the root cause. When a diagnosis takes too long and additional tests are needed, it's both costly and mentally taxing for the patient. So, it wasn't that Matt misdiagnosed, and it wasn't solely my success either. I guess, being the shy person she is, Amy found it hard to express her own opinions. That's something Matt should reflect upon and improve. There was a lot I learned from this situation, and I found myself feeling grateful to Amy. And then, unexpectedly, I met Amy again 3 years later. At a matchmaking date, of all places. She was 24 and I was 33. Neither of us was seeing anyone. I'd been thinking it's about time I consider settling down given my age, but I never imagined the woman in the photo would be Amy. She had transformed into a composed, refined, beautiful woman with long black hair. I thought she was someone else with the same name, but when she said, "It's such a coincidence," at the meeting, I was sure it was Amy. "Really? Your leg? Oh, it's already been 3 years." "Yes, I've recovered fully that I can run now, thanks to you too," she said with a slight smile. She's still reserved, but her quiet smile made her incredibly beautiful, and I couldn't help but fall for her. The innocent look she had during rehab was gone, but now she had a mature, seductive beauty that any man would fall for. But apparently, she'd had several unsuccessful matchmakings. "I don't talk much. They say I seem boring," she said with a hint of sadness in her smile. "When I met her 3 years ago, I thought she was quiet and reserved, and that hasn't changed. But men are not great at reading the room. So many probably felt uneasy with a reserved nature." "I like both quiet and lively people," I said. "Huh, you don't need to force yourself to talk. I don't mind a calm atmosphere, and women like you are rare. It's actually a unique experience." I felt embarrassed hearing my own words. But Amy seemed pleased, smiling. "Maybe it'll work out with you." She said that to me. And with that, we began our relationship and eventually got married. We dated for a year, often going to places like movies or art galleries. She was quiet and reserved, but that's not the case anymore. "Hey, you were playing again without doing your homework," Amy's voice echoes once more today. At the same time, I catch a glimpse of our son, Jacob, exclaiming, "Oh no," as he bolts away. Born to us, Jacob has a sharp wit like Amy, yet he's always up to mischief, which is a handful. The once quiet Amy couldn't stay silent anymore, and our daily life became a lot more bustling after he was born. Honestly, it's a level of noise I could never have imagined since the day I met Amy. But I don't mind it. Listen up, Jacob. If you score below D on the next test, even Dad won't play with you anymore. An angry Amy is scary, so I better join in and help her side. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble too later. She's got me whipped now, I'll tell ya. They say moms are tough, and that's absolutely true. But I don't get it. This is impossible to solve." "It's not impossible. I will help you out, so let's get that homework done today." "Really? Yay." Amy just shrugged and watched the conversation with a good grief expression. Even with the struggles of parenting, Amy is a stunning, beautiful mom. I can't help but be smitten by her. Seeing this, our son teased, "Daddy's staring at mommy again. That guy." Next video. My name's Tom. Recently, I got married to someone very special to me. But it wasn't a smooth journey to get to this point. I'm planning to share the story of my wife and me in chronological order. My wife and I were both hired at the same company. Both are the same age, having both joined the company as college graduates. My wife's name is Margaret. Back then, we were just colleagues, and I used to casually call her Margaret. After our orientation, we ended up in the same department. We were both in sales, encouraging each other to do our best, grinding day in and day out. At the time, I had a girlfriend. We were getting along pretty well, I'd say. Then, in late April, I got a call from my buddy Joe. Joe is an old high school buddy of mine. We went to different college but would occasionally hang out, just the guys. I got a call from Joe saying, "I got some couple tickets for an amusement park. Want to bring our girlfriends?" I'd never been on a double date before, so it was a bit awkward, but it seemed like it could make a good memory. My girlfriend was also up for it, so we decided to go. On the day of our double date during the long weekend, we met up at the location. I got out of my car and shouted, "Hey, Joe." Joe raised his hand. "Hey, long time no see." We both knew that we had girlfriends, but we'd never actually met them or even heard their names before. Feeling a bit jittery, we introduced our girls. "This is Margaret. Nice to meet ya." The moment I saw the face of the girl stepping out of Joe's car, I said, "What, Margaret? Tom, is that you?" We both looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. Turns out, my buddy Joe's girlfriend was none other than my coworker Margaret. "No way. I knew you were in sales, but Tom and Margaret, you're at the same company." Joe was equally shocked and raised his voice. It was such a coincidence, all we could do was laugh. Riding that wave of laughter, we all acted like kids running around an amusement park. Then at lunchtime, they said they had something to tell me. Joe and Margaret were planning to get married in June. The wedding date was still up in the air, but they said once they'd saved up some cash, they'd like to have a wedding. So, come a lucky day in June, Joe and Margaret tied the knot. Margaret kept her last name. I hear that ever since they got married, Margaret's been making Joe's lunch every day. I was privy to all these lovey-dovey stories. But as for me, I got dumped by my girlfriend that fall. Ever since she heard Joe and Margaret were getting married, she'd been mulling over our future. I'd been thinking about it too, but what she said hit me hard. "I can't see a future with you." I asked if I'd done something wrong, but her response was vague, something like, "It just doesn't feel right." Let the past be the past, I thought, but it was a tough pill to swallow. Joe and Margaret were the ones who consoled and encouraged me. Despite being newlyweds, they'd invite me over and lift my spirits with some drinks. Best friends and co-workers, including myself. The three of us started hanging out more once Joe and Margaret got married. I thought this enjoyable dynamic would last forever. Then a new year rolled around, and spring came along. It was the spring marking our second year at the company. One Monday, when work hours had already started, Margaret was nowhere to be found. "Is she unusually off work today?" Just as I was about to ask my boss that, my phone rang. It was an old high school buddy. "Sorry to bother you at work, but I just got a call from a friend." Without any pleasantries, he sounded rushed. But the next words from him left me in shock. Joe had an accident. It was a call to tell me that Joe had passed away this morning." "What, Joe? You're kidding me. What do you mean he's gone?" I was rattled. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The accident happened last night. Joe was in the passenger seat of a friend's car, and an oncoming car, apparently a dozing driver, ran into the car Joe was in. He was rushed into emergency surgery but passed away in the early hours. I attended Joe's funeral." "Joe, why did it have to be you?" I couldn't stop the tears. The harsh reality was too much to take. Margaret held it together at first but broke down crying during the service. I couldn't bear to look at her like that, so I covered my face with a handkerchief, trying to stifle my sobs. Afterwards, Margaret took a month off work. By the time she came back, she had lost a lot of weight. When she returned, she came to my desk. "Tom, thanks for all the emails. Sorry for worrying you." Margaret smiled, but I could tell she was still forcing it. "Even I can't believe that Joe's gone. That's why I've been so worried about Margaret. During her time off, I have been sending her emails at night. Are you eating properly? Getting good sleep in your bed?" That's all I could really ask in my emails. But Margaret told me she appreciated those messages. Being alone at night was tough for her. When she got home, the loneliness hit her hard, and she couldn't get anything down. When she got an email from me, it made her think that she had to at least try to live a normal life. Even if it was just one sandwich, she managed to eat it. Seeing Margaret like that, I couldn't bring myself to say, "I hope you get better soon." All I could do to make her feel even a little bit better was to invite her out for dinner after work. I've tried a couple of times with colleagues who are also worried about her, but she declined, saying she's not up for it yet. But we kept asking her. And eventually, she accepted our invitation. Her appetite was small, but seeing Margaret say the food was good and actually eating a little made me feel somewhat relieved. On our way back from dinner, as we live in the same direction, Margaret and I walked down the night streets together. Then Margaret started talking about Joe. He is in the cemetery now, and all that's left at home is his portrait. I'm really alone now. Margaret started to cry, her tears flowing freely. All I could do for her was offer her my handkerchief and rub her back. Her sorrow from losing Joe is beyond my own. With that thought, I found myself at a loss for words. I'm sorry, thank you. Margaret had been crying for a while, but she said that and started walking again. I had initially planned to only walk her part of the way home, but I couldn't bear to let her walk alone in her current state, so I ended up walking her all the way to her house. There, I lit a candle in memory of Joe. Pictures from the funeral, along with cheerful photos of Margaret and Joe, adorned the room. Seeing that, I couldn't hold back my tears either. I'm sorry for crying when I should be the one encouraging you. My words got choked up in tears. It's too soon, isn't it? We had so much more ahead of us. It's frustrating, but I bet Joe is the most frustrated of all. Margaret said that as she wiped away her tears. But I have to keep going, or else Joe would worry, she shared. Even though she might not be fully ready yet, she's trying to cheer up a little bit at a time. I wondered what I could do for Margaret. All I can do is listen to her and take her out to eat. That felt so inadequate. Margaret had said that she finds it easier to cope while working, but it seemed like she was putting on a brave face. Yet, she managed to get through the first anniversary of Joe's passing, and while she still had her down moments, Margaret was slowly getting her spirits back. During this time, the support from everyone remained unchanged. A few of us from work kept inviting her out to dinner after work. I continued to walk Margaret back to her house. On days when we got home early, I would light a candle in memory of Joe. One day while I was walking Margaret back to her house, she asked, "Why do you always walk me home? I don't want you to be in danger if something happens on the way home, right? There are dark streets. Besides, if something happened to Margaret, Joe would be furious. I don't care if it's none of my business, but I have to protect you, whom Joe cherished so much. Otherwise, he's going to get mad at me in my dreams about what I'm doing." I say all this with a bit of a chuckle to lighten the mood. Margaret said thanks and she laughed along. Time passed, and we reached the third anniversary of Joe's passing. Both Margaret and I were more involved in our work than ever. On exhausting days, we continued to unwind by going out to dinner with some coworkers. Then one day, as I was walking Margaret home again, she said she had a small favor to ask. "You see, the light bulbs in my foyer and dressing room have gone out. I tried standing on a step stool, but I just can't reach. Could you help?" To Margaret, who seemed a bit embarrassed to ask, I cheerfully replied, "Sure thing, no big deal. Don't sweat the small stuff," I added, and Margaret smiled as if she were really pleased. Once inside her house, I replaced the light bulbs for her. "Thanks so much. It's surprising how much you need it, tall person, sometimes," she said. I joked, "Well, good thing I could reach the ceiling. Otherwise, that would have been embarrassing." "Huh?" Margaret laughed and said, "Funny thing is, when Joe changed a light bulb in another room, he was barely reaching it, trembling all the while." I laughed back, "Ha, well, I'm way taller than him. Yeah, this ceiling would be a stretch for Joe." Margaret suddenly burst out laughing. I stepped down from the step stool, folded it up, and handed it over to her. But just then, our fingers lightly touched, and our eyes met unexpectedly. The laughter that filled the air between us abruptly ceased. However, I looked away as if I felt nothing. That's when Margaret softly said, "Hey, why are you so kind?" Hearing that, our eyes met again. For a split second, I felt my heart skip a beat, but I said nothing and just looked at Margaret. "You're always encouraging me, and you're always concerned. You're too kind. I might get the wrong idea." Margaret spoke slowly, and once again, I felt my heart flutter. But then she said, "Just kidding. Sorry, forget it. Geez, maybe I'm a little tipsy today," and went on to put away the step stool as if nothing had happened. However, I found myself chasing after her, and before I knew it, I was hugging her from behind. A moment of silence passed. I could feel the warmth radiating from Margaret from my arms. And then it hit me. The feeling that I wanted to protect Margaret was there, and it wasn't just as a coworker or as a friend's wife. I was falling for Margaret. But the moment I realized this, my buddy Joe's face flashed through my mind. So I loosened my arms that were wrapped around her. "Sorry, I may be a little tipsy too." I apologized to Margaret. Margaret shook her head, saying no, and turned towards me. A tear was visible in her eye. I lifted my gaze slightly, and it landed on Joe's framed photo. Without a word, I walked up to the photo and lit a candle. In my heart, I whispered, "Sorry, Joe," unable to say anything else. Then I told Margaret, "See you at work tomorrow," and left her house. The next day at the office, Margaret and I acted as if nothing had happened. But from that day on, every time our eyes met, it felt as if we were swallowing something. I suspected Margaret felt the same way. These days continued for a while. And then one day, while I was walking Margaret home after having dinner with coworkers, an unusual silence filled the air. The words we'd been holding back since that moment had been gradually growing stronger. I stopped walking. Margaret noticed and stopped too. Then, I finally told Margaret how I felt. "Is it so bad if it's me? I want to be by your side, in any way possible." That was my true, sincere feeling. Margaret looked at me and after a moment of silence, nodded, yes. She had accepted my feelings. But it wasn't the end. On my day off that week, I went to a certain place. I stood in front of Joe's grave. This was important news. I wanted to say it here, where Joe was. "Joe, I've come to make a resolution. I'll make Margaret happy, and I'll take good care of her on your behalf too. So please, accept that I'll be the one with her. I promise, I'll protect her smile no matter what." I said that, then bowed my head in front of Joe's grave. How long I closed my eyes and bowed, I can't say. Suddenly, I felt a gentle, warm breeze blow by. I lifted my head and looked at Joe's grave, asking, "Do you forgive me?" I posed the question like that. Then another warm breeze blew. It felt like Joe was answering me. That warm wind had a kindness to it that reminded me of how Joe used to speak. I said, "Thank you," and bowed my head deeply once more. "I promise, I'll absolutely keep this vow." I swore that to Joe. As I left, I turned towards Joe's grave one last time and said, "Joe, I'll be back." With that, I walked away. A decade has passed since then. We had just recently observed the 13th anniversary of Joe's passing. Margaret and I have been together ever since, living in a committed relationship much like a common-law marriage. On a day that came after that, Margaret suddenly said she had something important to discuss. It was on our way back from visiting Joe's grave to honor his memory. It had become our custom to pause and rest at a park before heading back home after these visits. That's when Margaret suddenly turned serious and started speaking. "Tom, it's been a while, and we just had Joe's 13th memorial service, so I've been thinking it's about time. I know we shouldn't rush to conclusions, but we need to think about our own lives too. I'm sorry for everything up to this point. Thanks for being there for me. So, here's this. In Margaret's trembling hand was a marriage license. I hugged Margaret tightly. Don't apologize. I'm the one who said any form of us is fine, right? Margaret broke into tears, nodded yes, and forced a smile. Hey, don't cry. If you do, I'll feel like I've broken a man-to-man promise. I cheerfully said that to prevent Margaret from crying any further. Margaret laughed and said, "What's this man-to-man promise you were talking about?" Well, never mind that. I hugged Margaret again and looked up at the sky. Joe, I promise to keep my word to you. I'm sure Joe is watching over us, happy to see Margaret smiling. And so, we became a married couple. 2 years later, a new life was born into our family. A cute little girl who looks like Margaret. And on the day our child was born, there was a meteor shower. It was a special day for other reasons too. Joe loved stargazing. Both Margaret and I knew that. So we couldn't help but think that he was sending his blessings for a safe childbirth and our happiness. The child was safely born, full of energy. And she has since filled our lives with her adorable laughter. To ensure that the family we're committed to protecting can always smile. And while cherishing our loved ones as they deserve, we plan to keep living life in our own way. Eek, my first love, whom I haven't seen in 10 years. Now, just like in the movies, she's having a Marilyn Monroe moment. When you witness such a scene, you end up seeing things you shouldn't. Because of the guilt of having seen her in such a compromising position, I found myself in a situation where I had to agree to a rather outrageous request. My name is Jason. I'm a 28-year-old office worker. Graduated from college and landed a job at my current company. Working decently, earning a decent salary. All I wanted was a normal life, but things took a different turn when my chief took a special interest in me. Hey, Jason, get over here now, you slacker. The one summoning me again today is my manager, Robert. He's an old geezer, married with kids. Yes, what is it, sir? What do you mean, what is it? Why didn't you come when I called you immediately? Every time something doesn't go with his way, he uses me as his verbal punching bag. Even though the reason for his summons is often trivial, he'd give me a lecture just because I took a bit longer to respond. If I made a mistake, I would understand getting yelled at. But it's exhausting being constantly nitpicked and yelled at for the smallest of reasons. I'm exhausted. Another day comes to an end, enduring Robert's verbal abuse. Exhausted, I flopped onto my bed. And then, my cell phone buzzed with a notification. Looking at the screen, there's a message. I rarely get personal messages, so who could it be? The moment I saw the sender's name, my heart leapt. It's from Kathy, my childhood friend, my first love. I'd played with her since I could remember. Our houses were next to each other. Unlike my average family, Kathy came from an upper-class household. Her father is the CEO of an export-import company, and they lived in a huge house next door. We used to play together in the neighborhood, and she would occasionally invite me over. But as we entered middle school, things changed. Though we were childhood friends, we sometimes walked home together. Often, Kathy would talk honestly with me. Kathy was a long-haired girl with an authoritative aura, always taking charge. She was the center of the class, even a member of the student council. An all-rounder, she was also in the school band, the picture-perfect rich girl. But I knew the truth. Kathy was anything but a typical rich girl. She was blunt, casual, and quite a tomboy. I'm so done. I'm sick of pretending for my parents. Why do I have to choose activities based on their wishes? I'm not my dad's copy. On the way home as the sun began to set, She made remarks that would surely shock our classmates if they heard. The side of Kathy she shows only to me was just like any other ordinary girl. If you feel that way, you should stand up to them. It's the age for it, after all. If I do, they'll lock me up at home. I'd hate that. Kathy's parents were strict. Being the CEO and his wife, they were bound to be, but they put a lot of pressure on Kathy. As a result, her true nature was rebellious. An unseen rebellion, maybe that's the best way to put it. It seemed like her own way of rebelling. If she had to keep up the pretense both at home and outside, it's no wonder her personality became this way. So, I became her refuge where she could be her true self. Their friendship continued, even after we went to different high schools, after Kathy enrolled in an elite all-girls school. It wasn't much, just hanging out on weekends. But the nature of our outings changed a lot. Take that, all right. Turns out Kathy was always at the arcade near my place. And she was dolled up, in flashy clothes, a far cry from the refined lady image she portrayed at school. She said it was her way to blow off steam. She always seemed to enjoy video games anyway. But there were some rough-looking guys frequenting that arcade. Whenever one of them tried to hit on her, she'd use me as an excuse, calling me her boyfriend and bodyguard. Truth be told, I was never really the bodyguard type. Because Kathy, with her innate social skills, quickly befriended those rough guys, and would even thrash them in fighting games. Kathy's so darn good at these games. Your boyfriend sure isn't though. I'm not really into games, alright. Those guys liked Kathy and believed that I was her boyfriend, so they never made a move on her. Jason is just too weak to be any competition. You're good at studies, sports, and even video games. What are you, some kind of genius? On our way back from the arcade, I was always astounded by Kathy's skills. She'd joke, "I've been practicing in secret." We kept up this charade of pretending to be a couple. But the truth was, I had feelings for Kathy. But I never had the guts to confess, and I always felt I wasn't good enough for her. Moreover, I didn't want our current relationship to end. Throughout our high school years, we frequently went to the arcade on our dates. But after starting college, I stopped hearing from Kathy. I heard rumors. She got involved with a bad guy or had a fallout with her parents, but I knew all of those were lies. Kathy wouldn't do something so foolish. She probably moved to New York or found a boyfriend. Thinking all this, time flew by. Then, a message from Kathy after 10 long years. And her tone was just as casual as before. "Hey Jason, got a favor to ask, can you play my boyfriend again?" I chuckled at her unchanged attitude and replied, after a 10-year silence, "You asked the same thing. Aren't there better candidates than me?" I kept my tone light, just like before. Soon, her reply came. "Your messages are still the same, comforting. I want to talk, can we meet up?" I was taken aback. A lot changes in a woman in 10 years. The Kathy in my mind was still on the cusp of girlhood. But at 28, she'd be a full-fledged woman. Could I act the same in front of her now? Though I worried. Long time no see, Jason. There was no need for concern. Sure, Kathy had turned into a beauty. She'd cut her hair to a medium length and dyed it brown, which was surprising. She looked stunning, with her flawless skin, elegant makeup, and a lovely dress, far from the school uniform look. Any guy would surely be smitten. But inside, she was still the Kathy I knew. Somehow, it felt incredibly nostalgic, and I was able to act the same way I used to without even thinking about it. "It's been a while. You haven't changed a bit, although your appearance has." Of course, I've changed after 10 years, but you, Jason, haven't changed at all. As we chatted, we entered a diner. The diner we used to frequent during our student days was no longer there, but this one had kept the same interior, making it feel oddly nostalgic. So, why did you ask for something like that? You must have a boyfriend, right? No way. Everyone runs away once they get to know the real me. Ah, I can see that. You turn into a demon when you're angry. Ouch. I was about to say something when I got a swift kick under the table. That's what I'm talking about, I thought, giving her a look, but Kathy pretended not to know what I meant. My dad, he's been trying to set me up with someone without asking me, I guess because I hadn't gotten a boyfriend yet. Well, your dad is a strict person. That's right, and even though I've been saying no forever, he went ahead and set up a meeting for a potential match. Isn't that too much? I got so mad that I blurted out, I have a boyfriend, so don't do anything weird. Kathy's eyes were distant. While it might be a typical story for a young lady, it's definitely not okay to arrange a meeting without considering the person's feelings. It's no wonder Kathy was angry. But apparently, the other party wasn't deterred even after hearing she had a boyfriend. He said he was better than my boyfriend, as if he could compare to you, Jason. So, please, just this once, just pretend to be my boyfriend one more time. Kathy said that, her head bowed, almost as if she were about to kneel on the table. But I couldn't answer her right away. This wasn't just some childhood play acting. If we mess this up, it could cause trouble for Kathy. Let me think about it. So I said. Kathy looked a bit sad, but she smiled and said, that makes sense. It's natural to want some time to think. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Even though she smiled, it was awkward. I broke the tension by suggesting, shall we go outside? And we both left the diner. But it was still awkward. What should I do? I was thinking about it while we walked. Aha! Whoa! Suddenly, her dress blew up. Like Marilyn Monroe's iconic scene. She held her skirt down with all her might. It was like something out of a movie. Looking closer, I noticed she was standing over an air vent. She must have unknowingly walked over it, and unfortunately, the wind blew through. The wind stopped, and her skirt returned to normal. But she was glaring at me with an angry look. You saw it, didn't you? I didn't see. Why are you talking like that? I didn't see. Seriously, I wasn't thinking you were wearing white. You did see. I ended up digging my own grave and got hit by Kathy. A week later, I ended up agreeing to play the role of Kathy's boyfriend. That was because after the incident, Kathy puffed up her cheeks and told me, you have to take responsibility for seeing, and I gave in. Well, it can't be helped that I saw, even if it was an accident. Kathy said, you don't have to think it's a bother, let's just do it casually, like before. She told me that. She did say it, but it's not that simple. Man, I cursed my bad luck. I mean, what is Jason here? Turns out, my potential date was none other than the son of my annoying manager, Robert, named Derek. And naturally, Derek's dad, Robert, was there too. I had a bad feeling about this. I am dating Kathy. When I confidently said that, Robert, even before sitting down, pointed at me and blurted out, what, a loser like you? Are you blackmailing Kathy or something? She deserves better. Everyone at the company knows you're useless. You're just a scumbag who can't vent his frustrations without taking it out on others. I wanted to retort that he was the one being described, but I held back. I was amazed he could say such things before our date even started. Kathy looked taken aback. Sadly, it seemed Robert's domineering attitude wasn't just professional. Derek had inherited it. As soon as the day began, Derek wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise and started boasting about his accomplishments without being asked. Granted, on paper, he seemed impressive, but in between his boasts, he'd look down on me and say in tune with his father, I can make you happier than he can. I bet you've had a hard time with a guy like that. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." When he said that, even Kathy's father, Tom, was taken aback. They may want to put me down and raise their stock, but they are just sinking, and fast. They don't even realize how fast they are plummeting, like they are diving through the earth and into outer space. With Robert and Derek laughing and berating me, I was trying to figure out my next move. I was thinking hard, but Kathy beat me to the punch. "What is your problem? I can't stand you insulting the man I love, and stop promising happiness when you don't even know me." Watching Kathy like this, Derek nonchalantly replied, "No matter who you truly are, I'll still love you." Upon hearing this, Kathy said, "Then, I'll show you the real me. Follow me." She stood up and led us to a place. It was an arcade, a place we used to frequent. I won't date someone who's worse at games than me. Arcade. I love video games. It's a hobby I've hidden even from my dad. Only Jason knows. Seeing that, Kathy stormed into the arcade. I figured she's done hiding her true self from her dad, so I quickly explained that I've been going to the arcade with Kathy since forever. Tom gave me a cold stare, but he didn't say anything. And where she took us was a section filled with fighting games. If you're really that great, Derek, you should be able to win, right? I mean, how are games useful in real life? Excuse me, don't belittle gaming, it's fun. A life without shared hobbies would be so boring. Kathy went off on him and we ended up competing in a three-way score challenge. But it wasn't a fighting game, it was a shooting game, like a target practice. The only game where I could beat Kathy. Needless to say, I won. Derek, frustrated, said, "This wasn't a deal. I don't want to marry a rough girl like this," and ran off. Robert glared at me and muttered, "You'll pay for this," before leaving. And they left. Left behind were me, Kathy, and her father. Tom yelled, wasting time on such frivolous games. Naturally, he was angry. But Kathy shot back, "You always decide everything for me. And when I stand up to you, you just yell without listening. No wonder I want to escape into gaming." As I tried to mediate, Tom said, "This is probably why you can't find a wife." I lost my temper and snapped back. "I'll marry Kathy, so stop judging her based on her personality. Why are you always criticizing your own child? Kathy isn't a copy of you." Both were taken aback. Kathy, with wide eyes, whispered, "That was my line. Right, it's not a copy of the parent." This is something Kathy once said. I bet they didn't expect to hear such complaints. Tom remained silent. Maybe it hit too close to home. Feeling awkward, I said, "Anyway, please talk it out, parent and child," and ended the meeting. Did I go a bit overboard? With that thought, I went to work the next day. But my desk was gone. Instead, there was a note about a personal transfer. I was informed that I was being relocated to the middle of nowhere, something like rural Nebraska. Panicking, I asked Robert, "What's going on here?" But he just said, "Can't you see? We don't need incompetence." That was the end of that conversation. Apparently, someone reported a major mistake someone else had made as if I was the one responsible. They seemed pretty ticked off about the incident the day before. It was sheer retaliation. You should just keep quiet down at the bottom. Who do you think you are, challenging us? And that's how I ended up being shipped off to rural Nebraska. Voices like mine, just a regular employee, never get heard. Now, I have to move ASAP, and I'm swamped with packing. At that time, I received a call from Kathy asking me to come over to her place. I told her I was busy with the move, but she even offered to help with my relocation. I realized I had spoken out of turn, and honestly, I wanted to apologize to Tom. When I visited her home, for some reason, Tom was bowing deeply in apology to me. "I'm sorry. We put you through so much. Kathy told me you've been acting as her boyfriend and have been supporting her all this time. What? I'm a fool. Thanks to you, I realized. Just because I can do something doesn't mean Kathy can, and what I can't do, Kathy might very well be able to. Apparently, after that matchmaking meeting, Kathy had a heart-to-heart talk with her father. Seeing sides of his daughter he hadn't known existed made him realize how little he'd been observing her. Moreover, Kathy got to hear Tom's true feelings. Turns out, Kathy's parents had a kind of arranged marriage, much like the older generation in the US. Daniel had initially been engaged to a woman he fell in love with, but she cheated on him, leaving a deep scar. Later, through an arranged setup, he met Kathy's mother and built the happy family they have now. That's why Tom thought an arranged marriage isn't bad, and I found more happiness in that than in a love marriage. Kathy said she had a boyfriend, but what if she ended up abandoned like me? I don't want that for her. Such fears made him insist on choosing a husband for his dear daughter through matchmaking. While that's not something to be praised, at the core of Tom's actions was a strong desire to protect his daughter. I hope you'll continue to be by my daughter's side. You're the only one who truly sees her. For the first time, I felt acknowledged by Kathy's family. But I'm being relocated to Nebraska soon. When I told Kathy, she looked shocked and seemed to understand the situation. It's not to atone, but if you're open to it, how about working for us? Excuse me. Exactly. Instead of staying at a company with such a terrible boss, why not come to ours? I wondered if it was all right to think like that, but honestly, I had been considering switching jobs. If I'm going to be demoted anyway, maybe it's all right to just quit. Thinking like that, I surprisingly said, in that case, I appreciate the offer, and switched jobs. Having worked in sales for a long time, I got along at the new company more than I expected, but that's a story for another day. Later on, I heard that Robert got demoted in my place, but I don't really care about that anymore. By the way, we officially started dating. Well, after all, I had declared my intentions, even saying I'd marry her. It's the first time we've walked together as a couple. True that. Doesn't feel much different, though. You always say stuff like that. Saying that, Kathy accompanied me on my way home. For the first time since becoming a couple, we walked hand in hand. I wished we could have done this sooner. If I had been braver, maybe I wouldn't have had to pretend to be her boyfriend. So, I won't hesitate anymore. Hey, Kathy. What? I love you. It's about time you told me. Both of us said that and walked hand in hand, laughing together. It's my first time taking a trip to a hot spring with a man. I feel a bit uneasy, but you need to entertain me. The boss, who usually dumps all the work on me and constantly complains, is now smiling at me. My boss smiles at me, but it feels like a stranger. She is acting like we're meeting for the first time. I'm not used to going on trips to hot spring with a woman, but I'll do my best to make it enjoyable for you. Saying that, my face turned red. Why did I end up coming on this hot spring trip with my boss? There was a particular reason I was unaware of until today. My name is Mike. I'm 24 and work in the kitchen of a major food chain. My dad ran a sushi bar for many years. However, a few years before I was about to graduate from culinary school, my dad collapsed from overworking. He had to take a long break for recovery, and he ended up closing the sushi bar he had run for years. I'll take over Dad's business once I graduate from culinary school. I got my chef's license in college and went to train in your restaurant. I wanted to continue the business my dad built, so I begged him. But my dad disagreed. I can't trust you with my business when you have no work experience. Get a job elsewhere first and learn how to behave professionally. Working in a family business can lead to taking things for granted. Realizing the naivety of my thoughts after what my dad said, I acknowledged my mistake. But I had earned my chef's license in culinary school with the goal of becoming a chef like my dad. When my dad refused to let me take over, I felt lost about what kind of job I really wanted. A friend from culinary school told me, "You know the restaurant we always go to? They're hiring and have amazing pay and training programs. They have many locations, and you can choose one close to home." My friend introduced me to the job listing of the major food chain, which is where I currently work. The pay is indeed much better than other job offers, and they even offer training programs abroad. Impressed with the unexpected benefits, I took the interview and was hired. It's been 3 years since I joined as a fresh graduate. I've been working hard to support my parents. However, there was one major problem at work. That was the bad relationship with my immediate boss. My boss, Arya, is the precious only daughter of the company's CEO. She's very strict at work, always pushing tasks onto me and constantly nitpicking. What's with this presentation? It's nothing like the picture. Customers will complain about this misleading photo. What's with this salty pasta? Did you mess up the seasoning? This is toxic. She would then throw away the dish I prepared. Yet, she never does any cooking herself and only chats with regular customers. I'm busy with customer service, so I'll leave all the cooking to you. She would leave all the kitchen tasks to me. Being alone and trying to prepare dishes for many customers at once can get overwhelming. My boss would come unexpectedly to check for even the smallest mistakes. Not just me, she would do the same with newcomers who had only been with the company for a few months. As a result, I've seen about 15 chefs resign in the past 3 years. If it wasn't for such a bossy manager, we wouldn't be struggling with staff shortages. I strongly disliked my boss, who was unreasonable and always complaining. On top of that, I couldn't stand the worsening staff shortage because of her. I have to prepare dishes for 20 customers all by myself. Her delegation of tasks is seriously messed up. Thankfully, I live with my parents, so I have them to vent my frustrations to. When the stress and fatigue from work build up, I would vent to my parents and they would listen. My dad would silently nod while my mom would say, "That sounds tough." But I noticed a complex look on their faces whenever they listened to my complaints, a mix of concern and sadness. Maybe they're tired of my constant complaints. Did I get carried away? I noticed the look on my parents' faces and reflected on my actions. I started to hold back on my complaints to them. A few months passed, and then my birthday came. "Thanks for always working hard. Every once in a while, you should take some time off," my mom said, handing me a spa voucher. "Hut, only for one person. Aren't we going as a family?" I was surprised, but my mom, with a hesitant look on her face, said, "Ever since your dad collapsed, he hasn't been eating much, right? It's risky for him to go to a hot spring because he might faint." Indeed, since my dad collapsed from exhaustion a few years back, he had lost a lot of weight from not eating much. His blood pressure and pulse weren't stable, and he was under the care of his primary doctor for his arrhythmia. Taking him on a spa trip would indeed be risky. I mean, we don't have to go to a hot spring. Aren't these things supposed to be for the whole family? I had a slight complaint towards my mom, but considering my dad's condition, I couldn't voice it. "Well, maybe going alone once in a while isn't a bad idea, thanks, I'll enjoy it." I smiled at my mom, who looked relieved and said, "I'm glad you liked it." The following month, during the long weekend, I went to the spa alone with the voucher my mom had given me. As soon as I arrived at the spa hotel, there was a woman arguing with the receptionist in the lobby. "There's no way my reservation isn't in. Isn't this a mistake on your part? Please check properly." I recognized the assertive voice of the woman. It was the same voice of my boss I hear at work. "Arya, "What are you doing here?" I was surprised to see my boss, but she approached me aggressively. "I was supposed to meet my parents here, but there's no reservation under their name. Why are you here?" My boss seemed quite furious and lashed out at me. "Calm down," I said, handing my voucher to the receptionist. "We've been expecting you, sir. You have a reservation in the same room with this lady." The receptionist, with a relieved expression, handed me a key to a room. "Wait a minute, I came alone. I'd like separate rooms, please." I hastily conveyed this, but the receptionist showed me the reservation form and said, "But you clearly reserved a shared room." My boss, who had been assertive a little while ago, looked as if she was about to panic. I decided to head to our room and discuss the situation further with my boss. As soon as we entered the room, she called the CEO. "Dad, what's going on? I wasn't told I'd be sharing a room with a subordinate." She seemed upset with the CEO for a while, but after hearing some explanation, she looked dejected. "So that's what it was. You could have told me directly." Then she got off the phone with the CEO. And the boss, looking downcast, explained the situation to me. Actually, for a while now, Mike had mentioned that he would invite his childhood friend, a sushi chef, to add sushi and sashimi to our restaurant's special menu. She struggled to find her words. I didn't understand what he meant when he said, "Don't be too hard on your subordinate. He's an important business partner and you're betrothed." Now I finally get it. I can't believe I'm engaged to you. I calmly responded. "I hadn't heard about you being my fiancé either, but my dad is indeed a sushi chef." There was an awkward silence between us. Unable to bear it any longer, I called my dad. "Hello, Dad, what's this about sharing a room with my boss? Please explain." I asked in a voice close to tears, and my dad chuckled and replied, "I knew you two weren't getting along. I couldn't bring myself to tell you she's your fiancé. Is it true about the engagement?" I was taken aback, and my dad proudly explained. "Her dad and I have been friends since childhood. It's hard for me to work alone, so he's helping expand my sushi and sashimi dishes to his restaurant chain." As I was lost for words, he continued with enthusiasm. "Choosing to work at your fiancé's company without me telling you is remarkable. Isn't it destiny? You and Arya were close in preschool. If you two are arguing at work, just reconcile." He hung up after leaving me with those words. I tried to recall the distant past, feeling bewildered. Come to think of it, I think I had a girlfriend back in preschool. Our parents were close friends from way back. Did they promise to set us up as childhood sweethearts? I can hardly remember, as I was so young. Then, why haven't we met since preschool? I was asked this by my boss, and it made me reminisce about the past. That's right. Around the time I started elementary school, my dad's restaurant started struggling. He had to take on some debt for a while. Then, my boss suddenly looked up, surprised. I remember that my dad's restaurant also faced troubles when I was in elementary school. Him copying another store's menu became a big problem. We both looked at each other and burst out laughing. So we both got busy helping our family businesses and just grew up without seeing each other. My dad, even being a businessman, has always been a bit clumsy with things like that. He could have just told me what was going on. We both laughed at how our parents handled things. It's my first time on a hot springs trip with a man. I'm a bit nervous. Will you make it enjoyable for me? Usually, she dumps all the work on me and complains, but now my boss was smiling at me. She looked like a complete stranger, not the boss I knew. Blushing and fidgeting, looking incredibly adorable. I'm not used to going on trips to a hot spring with a lady, but I'll do my best to make it enjoyable. We decided to make the most of our unexpected hot springs trip. Seeing her private, cute, and clingy side made me nervous. And I was taken aback by her appearance in her robe. I couldn't tell just from working with her, but she had a slim figure with large breasts. She looked incredibly beautiful. Her unexpected sides kept making my heart race. Returning home from the trip, our fathers were arguing. It can't be helped. The kids just don't get along. I waited 3 years for my son to get used to his job, but they just aren't getting close. You should have explained the situation before sending them on a trip. What if that made their relationship worse? You sent your daughter to, without explaining, right? It's the same. Seeing me, my dad said. How was it? Did you enjoy the hot springs? Sorry, Mike, for sending you without any explanation. Ara's dad was like, I'll make sure to tell my daughter properly, so it's okay to let the two of them go to a spa, you know. My dad looked at the CEO, who awkwardly said, I wanted to tell my daughter about the arranged marriage, but couldn't bring myself to do it when she was right there. In the end, neither father could explain to us, and the day of the hot springs trip just arrived. Mike, I'm sorry. I knew you two didn't get along, but I wanted our families to be close again. Plus, I wanted our businesses to prosper by joining forces. Being apologized to by the CEO made me feel uneasy. It's fine. It was unexpected, but I had a good time. As I said that, my boss stepped forward. You guys have such a clumsy way of communicating. Important things should be explained to the person directly involved, right? I'm sorry for being so awkward. The CEO bowed his head, and my boss blushed and said, well, it's okay. The setup was messy, but it was nice to have a heart-to-heart conversation with my subordinate. So, usually when you dump work on me and nag, it's just because you care about me, right? They say we tend to tease the ones we like. Before I could finish, she covered my mouth and said, idiot. I told you to keep what we talked about in the hot springs a secret. Seeing us, our fathers felt relieved. Who would have thought my fiancé would be in the company I joined? How would college me react if he knew about this through time travel? But the biggest surprise was finding out that my boss, whom I thought disliked me, actually had feelings for me. If we hadn't gone on that hot springs trip, I might have never understood your feelings. I said, and she replied with a teasing smile. And I might have never confessed my feelings to you. We laughed, now dating as a couple. She's still strict at work, sometimes unreasonable, and dumps a lot of work on me. But if all that is out of love, I feel like I can handle anything. I wonder if after we get married, will you still be strict about the cooking? I muttered, and she replied with a stern face, did you say something? We're at work now, you know. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I responded with enthusiasm and am hard at work today as well. Even during work, I daydream about marrying her and can't help but grin to myself, but that's a secret from her. Well, she might actually have a hunch that I'm thinking of proposing. So, what did you think? Subscribing to the channel would really boost my motivation. See you in the next video.